Recorded by Gesine. Dream Psychology by Sigmund Freud. Translated by M.D. Eder. Chapter 4. Dream Analysis. Perhaps we shall now begin to suspect that dream interpretation is capable of giving us hints about the structure of our psychic apparatus, which we have thus far expected in vain from philosophy. We shall not, however, follow this track, but return to our original problem as soon as we have cleared up the subject of dream disfigurement. The question has arisen how dreams with disagreeable content can be analyzed as the fulfillment of wishes. We see now that this is possible in case dream disfigurement has taken place, in case the disagreeable content serves only as a disguise for what is wished. Keeping in mind our assumptions in regard to the two psychic instances, we may now proceed to say, disagreeable dreams, as a matter of fact, contain something which is disagreeable to the second instance, but which at the same time fulfills a wish of the first instance. They are wish dreams, in the sense that every dream originates in the first instance, while the second instance acts towards the dream only in repelling, not in a creative manner. If we limit ourselves to a consideration of what the second instance contributes to the dream, we can never understand the dream. If we do so, all the riddles which the authors have found in the dream remain unsolved. That the dream actually has a secret meaning, which turns out to be the fulfillment of a wish, must be proved afresh for every case by means of an analysis. I therefore select several dreams which have painful contents, and attempt an analysis of them. They are partly dreams of hysterical subjects, which require long preliminary statements, and now and then also an examination of the psychic processes which occur in hysteria. I cannot, however, avoid this added difficulty in the exposition. When I give a psychoneurotic patient analytic treatment, dreams are always, as I have said, the subject of our discussion. It must, therefore, give him all the psychological explanations, through whose aid I myself have come to an understanding of his symptoms, and here I undergo an unsparing criticism, which is perhaps not less keen than that I must expect from my colleagues. Contradiction of the thesis that all dreams are the fulfillments of wishes is raised by my patients with perfect regularity. Here are several examples of the dream material which is offered me to refute this position. "You always tell me that the dream is a wish fulfilled," begins a clever lady patient. "Now I shall tell you a dream in which the content is quite the opposite, in which a wish of mine is not fulfilled. How do you reconcile that with your theory?" The dream is as follows. I want to give a supper, but having nothing at hand except some smoked salmon, I think of going marketing, but I remember that it is Sunday afternoon, when all the shops are closed. I next try to telephone to some caterers, but the telephone is out of order, thus I must resign my wish to give a supper. I answer, of course, that only the analysis can decide the meaning of this dream, although I admit that at first sight it seems sensible and coherent, and looks like the opposite of a wish fulfillment. But what occurrence has given rise to this dream? I ask. You know that the stimulus for a dream always lies among the experiences of the preceding day. Analysis. The husband of the patient, an upright and conscientious wholesale butcher, had told her the day before that he is growing too fat, and that he must, therefore, begin treatment for obesity. He was going to get up early, take exercise, keep to a strict diet, and above all accept no more invitations to suppers. She proceeds laughingly to relate how her husband, at an inn table, had made the acquaintance of an artist, who insisted upon painting his portrait because he, the painter, had never found such an expressive head. But her husband had answered in his rough way that he was very thankful for the honor, but that he was quite convinced that a portion of the backside of a pretty young girl would please the artist better than his whole face. She said that she was at the time very much in love with her husband, and teased him a good deal. She had also asked him not to send her any caviar. What does that mean? As a matter of fact, she had wanted for a long time to eat a caviar sandwich every forenoon, but had grudged herself the expense. Of course, she would at once get the caviar from her husband, as soon as she asked him for it. But she had begged him, on the contrary, not to send her the caviar, in order that she might tease him about it longer. This explanation seems far-fetched to me. Unadmitted motives are in the habit of hiding behind such unsatisfactory explanations. We are reminded of subjects hypnotized by Bernheim, who carried out a post-hypnotic order, and who, upon being asked for their motives, instead of answering, "I do not know why I did that," had to invent a reason that was obviously inadequate. Something similar is probably the case with the caviar of my patient. I see that she is compelled to create an unfulfilled wish in life. Her dream also shows the reproduction of the wish as accomplished. But why does she need an unfulfilled wish? The ideas so far produced are insufficient for the interpretation of the dream. I beg for more. After a short pause, which corresponds to the overcoming of a resistance, she reports further that the day before she had made a visit to a friend, of whom she is really jealous, because her husband is always praising this woman so much. Fortunately, this friend is very lean and thin, and her husband likes well-rounded figures. Now of what did this lean friend speak? Naturally of her wish to become somewhat stouter. She also asked my patient, "When are you going to invite us again? You always have such a good table." Now the meaning of the dream is clear. I may say to the patient, "It is just as though you had thought at the time of the request, 'Of course I'll invite you so you can eat yourself fat at my house and become still more pleasing to my husband. I would rather give no more suppers.' The dream then tells you that you cannot give a supper, thereby fulfilling your wish not to contribute anything to the rounding out of your friend's figure. The resolution of your husband to refuse invitations to supper for the sake of getting thin teaches you that one grows fat on the things served in company. Now only some conversation is necessary to confirm the solution. The smoked salmon in the dream has not yet been traced. How did the salmon mentioned in the dream occur to you?" "Smoked salmon is the favorite dish of this friend," she answered. I happen to know the lady, and may corroborate this by saying that she grudges herself the salmon just as much as my patient grudges herself the caviar. The dream admits of still another and more exact interpretation, which is necessitated only by a subordinate circumstance. The two interpretations do not contradict one another, but rather cover each other, and furnish a neat example of the usual ambiguity of dreams, as well as of all other psychopathological formations. We have seen that at the same time that she dreams of the denial of the wish, the patient is in reality occupied in securing an unfulfilled wish, the caviar sandwiches. Her friend, too, had expressed a wish, namely to get fatter, and it would not surprise us if Our Lady had dreamt that the wish of the friend was not being fulfilled, for it is her own wish that a wish of her friend's, for increase in weight, should not be fulfilled. Instead of this, however, she dreams that one of her own wishes is not fulfilled. The dream becomes capable of a new interpretation, if in the dream she does not intend herself, but her friend, if she has put herself in the place of her friend, or, as we may say, has identified herself with her friend. I think she has actually done this, and as a sign of this identification she has created an unfulfilled wish in reality. But what is the meaning of this hysterical identification? To clear this up, a thorough exposition is necessary. Identification is a highly important factor in the mechanism of hysterical symptoms. By this means patients are enabled in their symptoms to represent not merely their own experiences, but the experiences of a great number of other persons, and can suffer, as it were, for a whole mass of people, and fill all the parts of a drama by means of their own personalities alone. It will here be objected that this is a well-known historical imitation. the ability of hysteric subjects to copy all the symptoms which express them when they occur in others, as though their pity were stimulated to the point of reproduction. But this only indicates the way in which the psychic process is discharged in hysterical imitation. The way in which a psychic act proceeds and the act itself are two different things. The latter is slightly more complicated than one is apt to imagine the imitation of hysterical subjects to be. It corresponds to an unconscious concluded process, as an example will show. The physician who has a female patient with a particular kind of twitching lodged in the company of other patients in the same room in the hospital is not surprised when some morning he learns that this peculiar hysterical attack has found imitations. He simply says to himself, "The others have seen her and have done likewise." That is psychic infection. Yes, but psychic infection proceeds in somewhat the following manner. As a rule, patients know more about one another than the physician knows about each of them, and they are concerned about each other when the visit of the doctor is over. Some of them have an attack today. Soon it is known among the rest that a letter from home, a return of love-sickness, or the like, is the cause of it. Their sympathy is aroused, and the following syllogism, which does not reach consciousness, is completed in them. If it is possible to have this kind of attack from such causes, I too may have this kind of attack, for I have the same reasons. If this were a cycle capable of becoming conscious, it would perhaps express itself in fear of getting the same attack, but it takes place in another psychic sphere, and therefore ends in the realization of the dreaded symptom. Identification is therefore not a simple imitation, but a sympathy based upon the same etiological claim. It expresses an as though, and refers to some common quality which has remained in the unconscious. Identification is most often used in hysteria to express sexual community. A hysterical woman identifies herself most readily, although not exclusively, with persons with whom she has had sexual relations, or who have sexual intercourse with the same persons as herself. Language takes such a conception into consideration. Two lovers are one. In the hysterical fantasy, as well as in the dream, it is sufficient for the identification if one thinks of sexual relations, whether or not they become real. The patient then only follows the rules of the hysterical thought processes when she gives expression to her jealousy of her friend, which, moreover, she herself admits to be unjustified, in that she puts herself in her place, and identifies herself with her by creating a symptom, the denied wish. I might further clarify the process specifically as follows. She puts herself in the place of her friend in the dream, because her friend has taken her own place relation to her husband, and because she would like to take her friend's place in the esteem of her husband. Footnote 1. To sit for the painter. Goethe. And if he has no backside, how can the nobleman sit? End of footnote. Footnote 2. I myself regret the introduction of such passages from the psychopathology of hysteria, which, because of their fragmentary representation, and of being torn from all connection with the subject, cannot have a very enlightening influence. If these passages are capable of throwing light upon the intimate relations between the dream and the psychoneurosis, they have served the purpose for which I have taken them up. End of footnote. The contradiction to my theory of dreams, in the case of another female patient, the most witty among all my dreamers, was solved in a simpler manner, although according to the scheme that a non-fulfillment of one wish signifies the fulfillment of another. I had one day explained to her that the dream is a wish of fulfillment. The next day she brought me a dream to the effect that she was travelling with her mother-in-law to their common summer resort. Now I knew that she had struggled violently against spending the summer in the neighbourhood of her mother-in-law. I also knew that she had luckily avoided her mother-in-law by renting an estate in a far distant country resort. Now the dream reversed this wished-for solution. was not this in the flattest contradiction to my theory of wish fulfillment in the dream? Certainly it was only necessary to draw the inferences from this dream in order to get at its interpretation. According to this dream, I was in the wrong. It was thus her wish that I should be in the wrong, and this wish the dream showed her as fulfilled. But the wish that I should be in the wrong, which was fulfilled in the theme of the country home, referred to a more serious matter. At the time that I had made up my mind, from this material furnished by her analysis, that something of significance for her illness must have occurred at a certain time in her life. At that time I had made up my mind, from the material furnished by her analysis, that something of significance for her illness must have occurred at a certain time in her life. She had denied it because it was not present in her memory. We soon came to see that I was in the right. Her wish that I should be in the wrong, which is transformed into the dream, thus corresponded to the justifiable wish that those things which at the time had only been suspected had never occurred at all. Without an analysis, and merely by means of an assumption, I took the liberty of interpreting a little occurrence in the case of a friend, who had been my colleague through the 8 classes of the gymnasium. He once heard a lecture of mine delivered to a small assemblage, on the novel subject of the dream as the fulfillment of a wish. He went home, dreamt that he had lost all his suits (he was a lawyer), and then complained to me about it. I took refuge in the evasion. One can't win all one's suits. But I thought to myself, if for 8 years I sat as primus on the first bench, while he moved around somewhere in the middle of the class, may he not naturally have had a wish from his boyhood days that I, too, might for once completely disgrace myself? In the same way another dream of a more gloomy character was offered me by a female patient, as a contradiction to my theory of the wish dream. The patient, a young girl, began as follows. You remember that my sister has now only one boy, Charles. She lost the elder one, Otto, while I was still at her house. Otto was my favorite. It was I who really brought him up. I like the other little fellow too, but of course not nearly as much as the dead one. Now I dreamt last night that I saw Charles lying dead before me. He was lying in his little coffin, his hands folded. There were candles all about, and in short, it was just like the time of little Otto's death, which shocked me so profoundly. Now tell me, what does this mean? You know me, am I really bad enough to wish my sister to lose the only child she has left? Or does the dream mean that I wish Charles to be dead rather than Otto, whom I like so much better? I assured her that this interpretation was impossible. After some reflection I was able to give her the interpretation of the dream, which I subsequently made her confirm. Having become an orphan at an early age, the girl had been brought up in the house of a much older sister, and had met, among the friends and visitors who came to the house, a man who made a lasting impression upon her heart. It looked for a time as though these barely expressed relations were to end in marriage, but this happy culmination was frustrated by the sister, whose motives have never found a complete explanation. After the break, the man who was loved by our patient avoided the house. She herself became independent some time after little Otto's death, to whom her affection had now turned. But she did not succeed in freeing herself from the inclination for her sister's friend, in which she had become involved. Her pride commanded her to avoid him, but it was impossible for her to transfer her love to the other suitors who presented themselves in order. Whenever the man whom she loved, who was a member of the literary profession, announced a lecture anywhere, she was sure to be found in the audience. She also seized every other opportunity to see him from a distance, unobserved by him. I remembered that on the day before she had told me that the professor was going to a certain concert, and that she was also going there, in order to enjoy the sight of him. This was on the day of the dream, and the concert was to take place on the day on which she told me the dream. I could now easily see the correct interpretation, and I asked her whether she could think of any event which had happened after the death of little Otto. She answered immediately, "Certainly, at the time the professor returned after a long absence, and I saw him once more beside the coffin of little Otto. It was exactly as I had expected. I interpreted the dream in the following manner. If now the other boy were to die, the same thing would be repeated. You would spend the day with your sister, the professor would surely come in order to offer condolence, and you would see him again under the same circumstances as at that time. The dream signifies nothing but this wish of yours to see him again, against which you are fighting inwardly. I know that you are carrying the ticket for today's concert in your bag. Your dream is a dream of impatience. It has anticipated the meeting which is to take place today by several hours. In order to disguise her wish, she had obviously selected a situation in which wishes of that sort are commonly suppressed, a situation which is so filled with sorrow that love is not thought of. And yet it is very easily probable that even in the actual situation at the bier of the second, more dearly loved boy, which the dream copied faithfully, she had not been able to suppress her feelings of affection for the visitor whom she had missed for so long a time. A different explanation was found in the case of a similar dream of another female patient, who was distinguished in her earlier years by her quick wit and her cheerful demeanours, and who still showed these qualities, at least in the notion which occurred to her in the course of treatment. In connection with a longer dream, it seemed to this lady that she saw her 15-year-old daughter lying dead before her in a box. She was strongly inclined to convert this dream image into an objection to the theory of wish fulfillment, but herself suspected that the detail of the box must lead to a different conception of the dream. Footnote: something like the smoked salmon in the dream of the deferred supper. End of footnote. In the course of the analysis, it occurred to her that on the evening before, the conversation of the company had turned upon the English word box, and upon the numerous translations of it into German, such as box, theatre box, chest, box on the ear, etc. From other components of the same dream, it is now possible to add that the lady had guessed the relationship between the English word box and the German Büchse, and had then been haunted by the memory that Büchse, as well as box, is used in vulgar speech to designate the female genital organ. It was therefore possible, making a certain allowance for her notions on the subject of topographical anatomy, to assume that the child in the box signified a child in the womb of the mother. At this stage of the explanation she no longer denied that the picture of the dream really corresponded to one of her wishes. Like so many other young women, she was by no means happy when she became pregnant, and admitted to me more than once the wish that her child might die before its birth. In a fit of anger following a violent scene with her husband, she had even struck her abdomen with her fists in order to hit the child within. The dead child was, therefore, really a fulfillment of a wish, but a wish which had been put aside for 15 years, and it is not surprising that the fulfillment of the wish was no longer recognized after so long an interval, for there had been many changes meanwhile. The group of dreams to which the two last mentioned belong, having as content the death of beloved relatives, will be considered again under the head of typical dreams. I shall there be able to show by new examples that in spite of their undesirable content, all these dreams must be interpreted as wish fulfillments. In the following dream, which again was told me in order to deter me from a hasty generalization of the theory of wishing in dreams, I am indebted not to a patient, but to an intelligent jurist of my acquaintance. I dream, my informant tells me, that I am walking in front of my house with a lady on my arm. Here a closed wagon is waiting, a gentleman steps up to me, gives his authority as an agent of the police, and demands that I should follow him. I only ask for time in which to arrange my affairs. Can you possibly suppose this is a wish of mine to be arrested? Of course not, I must admit. Do you happen to know upon which charge you were arrested? Yes, I believe for infanticide. Infanticide? But you know that only a mother can commit this crime upon her newly born child. That is true. Footnote. It often happens that a dream is told incompletely, and that a recollection of the omitted portions appear only in the course of the analysis. These portions subsequently fitted in regularly furnish the key to the interpretation. Compare below about forgetting in dreams. End of footnote. And under what circumstances did you dream? What happened on the evening before? I would rather not tell you that, it's a delicate matter. But I must have it, otherwise we must forego the interpretation of the dream. Well then, I will tell you. I spent the night not at home, but at the house of a lady who means very much to me. When we awoke in the morning, something again passed between us. Then I went to sleep again and dreamt what I have told you. The woman is married? Yes. And you do not wish her to conceive a child? No, that might betray us. Then you do not practice normal coitus? I'd take the precaution to withdraw before ejaculation. Am I permitted to assume that you did this trick several times during the night, and that in the morning you were not quite sure whether you had succeeded? That might be the case. Then your dream is the fulfillment of a wish. By means of it, you secure the assurance that you have not begotten a child, or, what amounts to the same thing, that you have killed a child. I can easily demonstrate the connecting links. Do you remember, a few days ago, we were talking about the distress of matrimony, Ehenot, and about the inconsistency of permitting the practice of coitus as long as no impregnation takes place, while every delinquency, after the ovum and the semen meet and the fetus is formed, is punished as a crime. In connection with this, we also recalled the medieval controversy about the moment of time at which the soul is really lodged in the fetus, since the concept of murder becomes admissible only from that point on. Doubtless you also know the gruesome poem by Lenau, which puts infanticide and the prevention of children on the same plane. Strangely enough, I had happened to think of Lenau during the afternoon. Another echo of your dream. And now I shall demonstrate to you another subordinate wish-fulfillment in your dream. You walk in front of your house with the lady on your arm. So you take her home, instead of spending the night at her house, as you do in actuality. The fact that this was wish-fulfillment, which is the essence of the dream, disguises itself in such an unpleasant form, has perhaps more than one reason. From my essay on the etiology of anxiety neuroses, you will see that I note interrupted coitus as one of the factors which cause the development of neurotic fear. It would be consistent with this that if after repeated cohabitation of the kind mentioned, you should be left in an uncomfortable mood, which now becomes an element in the composition of your dream. You also make use of this unpleasant state of mind to conceal the wish-fulfillment. Furthermore, the mention of infanticide has not yet been explained. Why does this crime, which is peculiar to females, occur to you? I shall confess to you that I was involved in such an affair years ago. Through my fault, a girl tried to protect herself from the consequences of a liaison with me by securing an abortion. I had nothing to do with carrying out the plan, but I was naturally for a long time worried lest the affair might be discovered. I understand this recollection furnished a second reason why the supposition that you had done your trick badly must have been painful to you. A young physician, who had heard this dream of my colleague when it was told, must have felt implicated by it, for he hastened to imitate it in a dream of his own, applying its mode of thinking to another subject. The day before he had handed in a declaration of his income, which was perfectly honest because he had little to declare. He dreamt that an acquaintance of his came from a meeting of the tax commission and informed him that all the other declarations of income had passed uncontested, but that his own had awakened general suspicion, and that he would be punished with a heavy fine. The dream is a poorly concealed fulfillment of the wish to be known as a physician with a large income. It likewise recalls the story of a young girl who was advised against accepting her suitor, because he was a man of quick temper who would surely treat her to blows after they were married. The answer of the girl was, "I wish he would strike me." Her wish to be married is so strong that she takes into the bargain the discomfort which is said to be connected with matrimony, and which is predicted for her, and even raises it to a wish. If I group the very frequently occurring dreams of this sort, which seem flatly to contradict my theory, in that they contain the denial of a wish or some occurrence decidedly unwished for, under the head of counter-wish dreams, I observe that they may all be referred to two principles, of which one has not yet been mentioned, although it plays a large part in the dreams of human beings. One of the motives inspiring these dreams is the wish that I should appear in the wrong. These dreams regularly occur in the course of my treatment if the patient shows a resistance against me, and I can count with a large degree of certainty upon causing such a dream after I have once explained to the patient my theory that the dream is a wish fulfillment. Footnote: Similar counter-wish dreams have been repeatedly reported to me within the last few years by my pupils, who thus reacted to their first encounter with the wish theory of the dream. End of footnote. I may even expect this to be the case in a dream merely in order to fulfill the wish that I may appear in the wrong. The last dream which I shall tell from those occurring in the course of treatment again shows this very thing. A young girl who has struggled hard to continue my treatment, against the will of her relatives and the authorities whom she had consulted, dreams as follows. She is forbidden at home to come to me any more. She then reminds me of the promise I made her to treat her for nothing, if necessary, and I say to her, I can show no consideration in money matters. It is not at all easy in this case to demonstrate the fulfillment of a wish, but in all cases of this kind there is a second problem, the solution of which helps also to solve the first. Where does she get the words which she puts into my mouth? Of course I have never told her anything like that, but one of her brothers, the very one who has the greatest influence over her, has been kind enough to make this remark about me. It is then the purpose of the dream that this brother should remain in the right, and she does not try to justify this brother merely in the dream. It is her purpose in life and the motive for her being ill. The other motive for counter-wish dreams is so clear that there is danger of overlooking it, as for some time happened in my own case. In the sexual make-up of many people there is a masochistic component, which has arisen through the conversion of the aggressive, sadistic component into its opposite. Such people are called ideal masochists if they seek pleasure not in the bodily pain which may be inflicted upon them, but in humiliation and in chastisement of the soul. It is obvious that such persons can have counter-wish dreams and disagreeable dreams, which, however, for them are nothing but wish fulfillment, affording satisfaction for their masochistic inclinations. Here is such a dream. A young man who has in earlier years tormented his older brother, towards whom he was homosexually inclined, but who had undergone a complete change of character, has the following dream, which consists of 3 parts. 1. He is insulted by his brother. 2. 2 adults are caressing each other with homosexual intentions. 3. His brother has sold the enterprise whose management the young man reserved for his own future. He awakens from the last-mentioned dream with the most unpleasant feelings, and yet it is a masochistic wish-dream, which might be translated: "It would serve me quite right if my brother were to make that sale against my interest, as a punishment for all the torments which he has suffered at my hands." I hope that the above discussion and examples will suffice, until further objection can be raised, to make it seem credible that even dreams with a painful content are to be analyzed as the fulfillment of wishes. Nor will it seem a matter of chance that in the course of interpretation one always happens upon subjects of which one does not like to speak or think. The disagreeable sensation with which such dreams arouse is simply identical with the antipathy which endeavours, usually with success, to restrain us from the treatment or discussion of such subjects, and which must be overcome by all of us, if in spite of its unpleasantness we find it necessary to take the matter in hand. But this disagreeable sensation, which occurs also in dreams, does not preclude the existence of a wish. Everyone has wishes which he would not like to tell to others, which he does not want to admit even to himself. We are, on other grounds, justified in connecting the disagreeable character of all these dreams with the fact of dream disfigurement, and in concluding that these dreams are distorted, and that the wish fulfillment in them is disguised until recognition is impossible for no other reason than that the repugnance, a will to suppress, exists in relation to the subject matter of the dream, or in relation to the wish which the dream creates. Dream disfigurement, then, turns out in reality to be an act of the censor. We shall take into consideration everything which the analysis of disagreeable dreams has brought to light, if we reword our formula as follows. The dream is the disguised fulfillment of a suppressed, repressed wish. Now there still remains as a particular species of dreams with painful content, dreams of anxiety, the inclusion of which under dreams of wishing will find least acceptance with the uninitiated. But I can settle the problem of anxiety dreams in very short order, for what they may reveal is not a new aspect of the dream problem. It is a question, in their case, of understanding neurotic anxiety in general. The fear which we experience in the dream is only seemingly explained by the dream content. If we subject the content of the dream to analysis, we become aware that the dream fear is no more justified by the dream content than the fear in a phobia is justified by the idea upon which the phobia depends. For example, it is true that it is possible to fall out of a window, and that some care must be exercised when one is near a window, but it is inexplicable why the anxiety in the corresponding phobia is so great, and why it follows its victims to an extent so much greater than is warranted by its origin. The same explanation, then, which applies to the phobia, applies also to the dream of anxiety. In both cases, the anxiety is only superficially attached to the idea which accompanies it and comes from another source. On account of the intimate relation of dream fear to neurotic fear, discussion of the former obliges me to refer to the latter. In a little essay on the anxiety neurosis, footnote, see selected papers on hysteria and other psychoneuroses, page 133, translated by A. A. Brill, Journal of Nervous and Mental Diseases, monograph series. End of footnote. I maintained that neurotic fear has its origin in the sexual life, and corresponds to a libido which has been turned away from its object and has not succeeded in being applied. From this formula, which has since proved its validity more and more clearly, we may deduce the conclusion that the content of anxiety dreams is of a sexual nature, the libido belonging to which content has been transformed into fear. End of chapter 4. Dream Analysis.
Reading by Robin Cotter, Toronto, Ontario, March 2007. Dream Psychology by Sigmund Freud, translated by M. D. Eder. Section 5. Sex in Dreams. The more one is occupied with the solution of dreams, the more willing one must become to acknowledge that the majority of the dreams of adults treat of sexual material and give expression to erotic wishes. Only one who really analyzes dreams, that is to say, who pushes forward from their manifest content to the latent dream thoughts, can form an opinion on this subject. Never the person who is satisfied with registering the manifest content. as for example Nake in his works on sexual dreams. Let us recognize at once that this fact is not to be wondered at, but that it is in complete harmony with the fundamental assumptions of dream explanation. No other impulse has had to undergo so much suppression from the time of childhood as the sex impulse in its numerous components. From no other impulse have survived so many and such intense unconscious wishes, which now act in the sleeping state in such a manner as to produce dreams. In dream interpretation, this significance of sexual complexes must never be forgotten, nor must they, of course, be exaggerated to the point of being considered exclusive. Of many dreams it can be ascertained by a careful interpretation that they are even to be taken bisexually, inasmuch as they result in an irrefutable secondary interpretation, in which they realize homosexual feelings, that is, feelings that are common to the normal sexual activity of the dreaming person. But that all dreams are to be interpreted bisexually seems to me to be a generalization as indemonstrable as it is improbable, which I should not like to support. Above all, I should not know how to dispose of the apparent fact that there are many dreams satisfying other than, in the widest sense, erotic needs, as dreams of hunger, thirst, convenience, etc. Likewise, the similar assertions, that behind every dream one finds the death sentence, Stekel, and that every dream shows a continuation from the feminine to the masculine line, Adler, seem to me to proceed far beyond what is admissible in the interpretation of dreams. We have already asserted elsewhere that dreams which are conspicuously innocent invariably embody coarse erotic wishes, and we might confirm this by means of numerous fresh examples. But many dreams which appear indifferent, and which would never be suspected of any particular significance, can be traced back, after analysis, to unmistakably sexual wish-feelings, which are often of an unexpected nature. For example, who would suspect a sexual wish in the following dream, until the interpretation had been worked out? The dreamer relates: "Between two stately palaces stands a little house, receding somewhat, whose doors are closed. My wife leads me a little way along the street, up to the little house, and pushes in the door, and then I slip quickly and easily into the interior of a courtyard that slants obliquely upwards." Any one who has had experience in the translating of dreams will, of course, immediately perceive that penetrating into narrow spaces and opening locked doors belong to the commonest sexual symbolism, and will easily find in this dream a representation of attempted coition from behind, between the two stately buttocks of the female body. The narrow slanting passage is of course the vagina. The assistance attributed to the wife of the dreamer requires the interpretation that in reality it is only consideration for the wife which is responsible for the detention from such an attempt. Moreover, inquiry shows that on the previous day a young girl had entered the household of the dreamer who had pleased him, and who had given him the impression that she would not be altogether opposed to an approach of this sort. The little house between the two palaces is taken from a reminiscence of the Hradschin in Prague, and thus points again to the girl who is a native of that city. If with my patients I emphasize the frequency of the Oedipus dream, of having sexual intercourse with one's mother, I get the answer, "I cannot remember such a dream." Immediately afterwards, however, there arises the recollection of another disguised and indifferent dream, which has been dreamed repeatedly by the patient, and the analysis shows it to be a dream of this same content, that is, another Oedipus dream. I can assure the reader that veiled dreams of sexual intercourse with the mother are a great deal more frequent than open ones to the same effect. There are dreams about landscapes and localities in which emphasis is always laid upon the assurance, "I have been there before." In this case the locality is always the genital organ of the mother. It can indeed be asserted with such certainty of no other locality that one has been there before. A large number of dreams, often full of fear, which are concerned with passing through narrow spaces or with staying in the water, are based upon fancies about the embryonic life, about the sojourn in the mother's womb, and about the act of birth. The following is the dream of a young man who in his fancy has already, while an embryo, taken advantage of his opportunity to spy upon an act of coition between his parents. He is in a deep shaft, in which there is a window, as in the Semmering tunnel. At first he sees an empty landscape through this window, and then he composes a picture into it, which is immediately at hand and which fills out the empty space. The picture represents a field which is being thoroughly harrowed by an implement, and the delightful air, the accompanying idea of hard work, and the bluish-black clods of earth make a pleasant impression. He then goes on and sees a primary school opened, and he is surprised that so much attention is devoted in it to the sexual feelings of the child, which makes him think of me. Here is a pretty water dream of a female patient, which was turned to extraordinary account in the course of treatment. At her summer resort at the lake, she hurls herself into the dark water at a place where the pale moon is reflected in the water. Dreams of this sort are parturition dreams. Their interpretation is accomplished by reversing the fact reported in the manifest dream content. Thus, instead of throwing one's self into the water, read coming out of the water, that is, being born. The place from which one is born is recognized if one thinks of the bad sense of the French la lune. The pale moon thus becomes the white "bottom" popo, which the child soon recognizes as the place from which it came. Now what can be the meaning of the patient's wishing to be born at her summer resort? I asked the dreamer this, and she answered without hesitation, "Hasn't the treatment made me as though I were born again?" Thus the dream becomes an invitation to continue the cure at this summer resort, that is, to visit her there. Perhaps it also contains a very bashful allusion to the wish to become a mother herself. Another dream of parturition, with its interpretation, I take from the work of E. Jones. She stood at the seashore watching a small boy, who seemed to be hers, wading into the water. This he did till the water covered him, and she could only see his head bobbing up and down near the surface. The scene then changed to the crowded hall of a hotel. Her husband left her, and she entered into conversation with a stranger." The second half of the dream was discovered in the analysis to represent a flight from her husband, and the entering into intimate relations with a third person, behind whom was plainly indicated Mr. X's brother mentioned in a former dream. The first part of the dream was a fairly evident birth fantasy. In dreams, as in mythology, the delivery of a child from the uterine waters is commonly presented by distortion as the entry of the child into water. Among many others, the births of Adonis, Osiris, Moses, and Bacchus are well-known illustrations of this. The bobbing up and down of the head in the water at once recalled to the patient the sensation of quickening she had experienced in her only pregnancy. Thinking of the boy going into the water induced a reverie in which she saw herself taking him out of the water, carrying him into the nursery, washing him and dressing him, and installing him in her household. The second half of the dream, therefore, represents thoughts concerning the elopement which belong to the first half of the underlying latent content. The first half of the dream corresponded with the second half of the latent content, the birth fantasy. In the first half the child entered the water, and then his head bobbed. In the underlying dream thoughts, first the quickening occurred, and then the child left the water, a double inversion. In the second half her husband left her. In the dream thoughts she left her husband. Another parturition dream is related by Abraham of a young woman looking forward to her first confinement. From a place in the floor of the house, a subterranean canal leads directly into the water. Parturition path, amniotic liquor. She lifts up a trap in the floor, and there immediately appears a creature dressed in a brownish fur, which almost resembles a seal. This creature changes into the young brother of the dreamer, to whom she has always stood in maternal relationship. Dreams of saving are connected with parturition dreams. To save, especially to save from the water, is equivalent to giving birth when dreamed by a woman. This sense is, however, modified when the dreamer is a man. Robbers, burglars at night, and ghosts, of which we are afraid before going to bed, and which occasionally even disturb our sleep, originate in one and the same childish reminiscence. They are the nightly visitors who have awakened the child to set it on the chamber so that it may not wet the bed, or have lifted the cover in order to see clearly how the child is holding its hands while sleeping. I have been able to induce an exact recollection of the nocturnal visitor in the analysis of some of these anxiety dreams. The robbers were always the father. The ghosts more probably corresponded to feminine persons with white nightgowns. When one has become familiar with the abundant use of symbolism for the representation of sexual material in dreams, one naturally raises the question whether there are not many of these symbols which appear, once and for all, with a firmly established significance like the signs in stenography, and one is tempted to compile a new dream book according to the cipher method. In this connection, it may be remarked that this symbol does not belong peculiarly to the dream, but rather to unconscious thinking, particularly that of the masses, and it is to be found in greater perfection in the folklore, in the myths, legends, and manners of speech, in the proverbial sayings, and in the current witticisms of a nation, than in its dreams. The dream takes advantage of this symbolism in order to give a disguised representation to its latent thoughts. Among the symbols which are used in this manner, there are, of course, many which regularly, or almost regularly, mean the same thing. Only it is necessary to keep in mind the curious plasticity of psychic material. Now and then, a symbol in the dream content may have to be interpreted, not symbolically, but according to its real meaning. At another time the dreamer, owing to a peculiar set of recollections, may create for himself the right to use anything whatever as a sexual symbol, though it is not ordinarily used in that way, nor are the most frequently used sexual symbols unambiguous every time. After these limitations and reservations, I may call attention to the following: Emperor and Empress, King and Queen, in most cases really represent the parents of the dreamer. The dreamer himself or herself is the prince or princess. All elongated objects, sticks, tree trunks, and umbrellas, on account of the stretching up which might be compared to an erection, all elongated and sharp weapons, knives, daggers, and pikes, are intended to represent the male member. A frequent, not very intelligible symbol for the same is a nail file, on account of the rubbing and scraping. Little cases, boxes, caskets, closets, and stoves correspond to the female part. The symbolism of lock and key has been very gracefully employed in Uhland in his song about the Gräfin Eberstein, to make a common smutty joke. The dream of walking through a row of rooms is a brothel or harem dream. Staircases, ladders, and flights of stairs, or climbing on these, either upwards or downwards, are symbolic representations of the sexual act. Smooth walls over which one is climbing, facades of houses upon which one is letting oneself down, frequently under great anxiety correspond to the erect human body, and probably repeat in the dream reminiscences of the upward climbing of little children on their parents or foster parents. Smooth walls are men. Often in a dream of anxiety, one is holding on firmly to some projection from a house. Tables, set tables, and boards are women, perhaps on account of the opposition which does away with the bodily contours. Since bed and board, mensa et thorus constitute marriage, the former are often put for the latter in the dream, and, as far as practicable, the sexual presentation complex is transposed to the eating complex. Of articles of dress, the woman's hat may frequently be definitely interpreted as the male genital. In dreams of men one often finds the cravat as a symbol for the penis. This indeed is not only because cravats hang down long, and are characteristic of the man, but also because one can select them at pleasure, a freedom which is prohibited by nature in the original of the symbol. Persons who make use of this symbol in the dream are very extravagant with cravats, and possess regular collections of them. All complicated machines and apparatus in dream are very probably genitals, and the description of which dream symbolism shows itself to be as tireless as the activity of wit. Likewise, many landscapes in dreams, especially with bridges or with wooded mountains, can be readily recognized as descriptions of the genitals. Finally, where one finds incomprehensible neologisms, one may think of combinations made up of components having a sexual significance. Children also in the dream often signify the genitals, as men and women are in the habit of fondly referring to their genital organ as their little one. As a very recent symbol of the male genital may be mentioned the flying machine, utilization of which is justified by its relation to flying, as well as occasionally by its form. To play with a little child, or to beat a little one, is often the dream's representation of onanism. A number of other symbols, in part not sufficiently verified, are given by Stekel, who illustrates them with examples. Right and left, according to him, are to be conceived in the dream in an ethical sense. The right way always signifies the road to righteousness, the left the one to crime. Thus the left may signify homosexuality, incest, and perversion, while the right signifies marriage, relations with a prostitute, etc. The meaning is always determined by the individual moral viewpoint of the dreamer." Unquote. Relatives in the dream generally play the role of genitals. Not to be able to catch up with a wagon is interpreted by Stekel as regret not to be able to come up to a difference in age. Baggage with which one travels is the burden of sin by which one is oppressed. Also numbers which frequently occur in the dream are assigned by Stekel a fixed symbolical meaning. But these interpretations seem neither sufficiently verified nor of general validity, although the interpretation in individual cases can generally be recognized as probable. In a recently published book by W. Stekel, Die Sprache des Traums, which I was unable to utilize, there is a list of the most common sexual symbols, the object of which is to prove that all sexual symbols can be bisexually used. He states, "Is there a symbol which, if in any way permitted by the phantasy, may not be used simultaneously in the masculine and feminine sense?" To be sure, the clause in parentheses takes away much of the absoluteness of this assertion, for this is not at all permitted by the phantasy. I do not, however, think it superfluous to state that in my experience Stekel's general statement has to give way to the recognition of a greater manifoldness. Besides those symbols, which are just as frequent for the male as for the female genitals, there are others which preponderately, or almost exclusively, designate one of the sexes, and there are still others of which only the male or only the female signification is known. To use long, firm objects and weapons as symbols of the female genitals, or hollow objects, chests, pouches, as symbols of the male genitals, is indeed not allowed by the fancy. It is true that the tendency of the dream and the unconscious fancy to utilize the sexual symbol bisexually betrays an archaic trend, for in children a difference in the genitals is unknown, and the same genitals are attributed to both sexes. These very incomplete suggestions may suffice to stimulate others to make a more careful collection. I shall now add a few examples of the application of such symbolisms in dreams, which will serve to show how impossible it becomes to interpret a dream without taking into account the symbolism of dreams, and how imperatively it obtrudes itself in many cases. 1. The hat as a symbol of a man, of the male genital. A fragment from the dream of a young woman who suffered from agoraphobia on account of a fear of temptation. I am walking in the street in summer. I wear a straw hat of peculiar shape, the middle piece of which is bent upwards, and the side pieces of which hang downwards. The description became here obstructed, and in such a fashion that one is lower than the other. I am cheerful and in a confidential mood, and as I pass a troop of young officers, I think to myself, none of you can have any designs upon me." Unquote. As she could produce no associations to the hat, I said to her, "The hat is really a male genital, with its raised middle piece and the two downward hanging side pieces." I intentionally refrained from interpreting those details concerning the unequal downward hanging of the two side pieces, although just such individualities in the determinations lead the way to the interpretation. I continued by saying that if she only had a man with such a virile genital, she would not have to fear the officers, that is, she would have nothing to wish from them, for she is mainly kept from going without protection and company by her fancies of temptation. This last explanation of her fear I had already been able to give her repeatedly, on the basis of other material. It is quite remarkable how the dreamer behaved after this interpretation. She withdrew her description of the hat, and claimed not to have said that the two side pieces were hanging downwards. I was, however, too sure of what I had heard to allow myself to be misled, and I persisted in it. She was quiet for a while, and then found the courage to ask why it was that one of her husband's testicles was lower than the other, and whether it was the same in all men. With this, the peculiar detail of the hat was explained, and the whole interpretation was accepted by her. The hat symbol was familiar to me long before the patient related this dream. From other but less transparent cases, I believe that the hat may also be taken as a female genital. 2. The little one as the genital, to be run over as a symbol of sexual intercourse. Another dream of the same agoraphobic patient. Her mother sends away her little daughter so that she must go alone. She rides with her mother to the railroad, and sees her little one walking directly upon the tracks, so that she cannot avoid being run over. She hears the bones crackle. From this she experiences a feeling of discomfort, but no real horror. She then looks out through the car window to see whether the parts cannot be seen behind. She then reproaches her mother for allowing the little one to go out alone." Unquote. Analysis. It is not an easy matter to give here a complete interpretation of the dream. It forms part of a cycle of dreams, and can be fully understood only in connection with the others. For it is not easy to get the necessary material sufficiently isolated to prove the symbolism. The patient at first finds that the railroad journey is to be interpreted historically as an allusion to a departure from a sanatorium for nervous diseases, with the superintendent of which she naturally was in love. Her mother took her away from this place, and the physician came to the railroad station and handed her a bouquet of flowers on leaving. She felt uncomfortable because her mother witnessed this homage. Here the mother therefore appears as a disturber of her love affairs, which is the role actually played by this strict woman during her daughter's girlhood. The next thought referred to the sentence, "She then looks to see whether the parts can be seen behind." Unquote. In the dream façade one would naturally be compelled to think of the parts of the little daughter run over and ground up. The thought, however, turns in quite a different direction. She recalls that she once saw her father in the bathroom naked from behind. She then begins to talk about the sex differentiation, and asserts that in the man the genitals can be seen from behind, but in the woman they cannot. In this connection she now herself offers the interpretation that the little one is the genital, her little one, she has a 4-year-old daughter, her own genital. She reproaches her mother for wanting her to live as though she had no genital, and recognizes this reproach in the introductory sentence of the dream. The mother sends away her little one so that she must go alone. In her fantasy, going alone on the street signifies to have no man and no sexual relations. Quar equals to go together, and this she does not like. According to all her statements, she really suffered as a girl on account of the jealousy of her mother, because she showed a preference for her father. The little one has been noted as a symbol for the male or the female genitals by Stekel, who can refer in this connection to a very widespread usage of language. The deeper interpretation of this dream depends upon another dream of the same night in which the dreamer identifies herself with a brother. She was a tomboy, and was always being told that she should have been born a boy. This identification with the brother shows with special clearness that the little one signifies the genital. The mother threatened her with castration, which could only be understood as a punishment for playing with the parts, and the identification, therefore, shows that she herself had masturbated as a child, though this fact she now retained only in memory concerning her brother. An early knowledge of the male genital, which she later lost, she must have acquired at that time, according to the assertions of this second dream. Moreover, the second dream points to the infantile sexual theory that girls originate from boys through castration. After I had told her of this childish belief, she at once confirmed it with an anecdote in which the boy asks the girl, "Was it cut off?" To which the girl replied, "No, it's always been so." The sending away of the little one of the genital in the first dream therefore also refers to the threatened castration. Finally, she blames her mother for not having been born a boy. That "being run over" symbolizes sexual intercourse would not be evident from this dream if we were not sure of it from many other sources. 3. Representation of a genital by structures, stairways, and shafts. Dream of a young man inhibited by a father complex. He is taking a walk with his father in a place which is surely the Prater, for the rotunda may be seen in front of which there is a small front structure to which is attached a captive balloon. The balloon, however, seems quite collapsed. His father asks him what this is all for. He is surprised at it, but he explains it to his father. They come into a court in which lies a large sheet of tin. His father wants to pull off a big piece of this, but first looks around to see if anyone is watching. He tells his father that all he needs to do is to speak to the watchman, and then he can take without any further difficulty as much as he wants to. From this court a stairway leads down into a shaft, the walls of which are softly upholstered, something like a leather pocketbook. At the end of this shaft there is a longer platform, and then a new shaft begins. Analysis. This dream belongs to a type of patient which is not favorable from a therapeutic point of view. They follow in the analysis without offering any resistances whatever up to a certain point, but from that point on they remain almost inaccessible. This dream he almost analyzed himself. "The rotunda," he said, "is my genital, the captive balloon in front is my penis, about the weakness of which I have worried." We must, however, interpret in greater detail. The rotunda is the buttock, which is regularly associated by the child with the genital. The smaller front structure is the scrotum. In the dream, his father asks him what this is all for, that is, he asks him about the purpose and arrangement of the genitals. It is quite evident that this state of affairs should be turned around, and that he should be the questioner. As such a questioning on the side of the father has never taken place in reality, we must conceive the dream thought as a wish, or take it conditionally as follows: "If I had only asked my father for sexual enlightenment." The continuation of this thought we shall soon find in another place. The court in which the tin sheet is spread out is not to be conceived symbolically in the first instance, but originates from his father's place of business. For discretionary reasons I have inserted the tin for another material in which the father deals, without, however, changing anything in the verbal expression of the dream. The dreamer had entered his father's business and had taken a terrible dislike to the questionable practices upon which profit mainly depends. Hence the continuation of the above dream thought, if I had only asked him, would be, he would have deceived me just as he does his customers. For the pulling off, which serves to represent commercial dishonesty, the dreamer himself gives a second explanation, namely, onanism. This is not only entirely familiar to us, but agrees very well with the fact that the secrecy of onanism is expressed by its opposite, why one can do it quite openly. It, moreover, agrees entirely with our expectations that the onanistic activity is again put off on the father, just as was the questioning in the first scene of the dream. The shaft he at once interprets as the vagina by referring to the soft upholstering of the walls. That the act of coition in the vagina is described as a going down, instead of in the usual way as a going up, I have also found true in other instances. The details, that at the end of the first shaft there is a longer platform and then a new shaft, he himself explains biographically. He had for some time consorted with women sexually, but had then given it up because of inhibitions, and now hopes to be able to take it up again with the aid of the treatment. The dream, however, becomes indistinct toward the end, and to the experienced interpreter it becomes evident that in the second scene of the dream the influence of another subject has begun to assert itself. In this his father's business and his dishonest practices signify the first vagina represented as a shaft, so that one might think of a reference to the mother. 4. The male genital symbolized by persons and the female by a landscape. Dream of a woman of the lower class whose husband is a policeman, reported by B. Dattner. Then someone broke into the house and anxiously called for a policeman. But he went with 2 tramps by mutual consent into a church, to which led a great many stairs. Behind the church there was a mountain, on top of which a dense forest. The policeman was furnished with a helmet, a gorget, and a cloak. The 2 vagrants, who went along with the policeman quite peaceably, had tied to their loins sack-like aprons. A road led from the church to the mountain. This road was overgrown on each side with grass and brushwood, which became thicker and thicker as it reached the height of the mountain, where it spread out into quite a forest. 5. A stairway dream. Reported and interpreted by Otto Rank. For the following transparent pollution dream I am indebted to the same colleague who furnished us with the dental irritation dream. I am running down the stairway in the stairhouse after a little girl whom I wish to punish because she has done something to me. At the bottom of the stairs someone held a child for me. A grown-up woman? I grasp it, but do not know whether I have hit it, for I suddenly find myself in the middle of the stairway, where I practice coitus with the child, in the air as it were. It is really no coitus. I only rub my genital on her external genital, and in doing this I see it very distinctly as I see her head, which is lying sideways. During the sexual act I see hanging to the left and above me, also as if in the air, 2 small pictures, landscapes, representing a house on a green. On the smaller one my surname stood in the place where the painter's signature should be. It seemed to be intended for my birthday present. A small sign hung in front of the pictures to the effect that cheaper pictures could also be obtained. I then see myself very indistinctly lying in bed, just as I had seen myself at the foot of the stairs, and I am awakened by a feeling of dampness which came from the pollution. Interpretation. The dreamer had been in a bookstore on the evening of the day of the dream, where, while he was waiting, he examined some pictures which were exhibited, which represented motives similar to the dream pictures. He stepped nearer to a small picture which particularly took his fancy, in order to see the name of the artist, which, however, was quite unknown to him. Later in the same evening, in company, he heard about a Bohemian servant girl who boasted that her illegitimate child was made on the stairs. The dreamer inquired about the details of this unusual occurrence, and learned that the servant girl went with her lover to the home of her parents, where there was no opportunity for sexual relations, and that the excited man performed the act on the stairs. In witty allusion to the mischievous expression used about wine adulterers, the dreamer remarked, "The child really grew on the cellar steps." These experiences of the day, which are quite prominent in the dream content, were readily reproduced by the dreamer. But he just as readily reproduced an old fragment of infantile recollection, which was also utilized by the dream. The stair-house was the house in which he had spent the greatest part of his childhood, and in which he had first become acquainted with sexual problems. In this house he used, among other things, to slide down the banister astride, which caused him to become sexually excited. In the dream he also comes down the stairs very rapidly, so rapidly that, according to his own distinct assertions, he hardly touched the individual stairs, but rather flew, or slid down, as we used to say. Upon reference to this infantile experience, the beginning of the dream seems to represent the factor of sexual excitement. In the same house and in the adjacent residence, the dreamer used to play pugnacious games with the neighboring children, in which he satisfied himself just as he did in the dream. If one recalls from Freud's investigation of sexual symbolism that in the dream stairs or climbing stairs almost regularly symbolizes coitus, the dream becomes clear. Its motive power, as well as its effect, as is shown by the pollution, is of a purely libidinous nature. Sexual excitement became aroused during the sleeping state. In the dream, this is represented by the rapid running or sliding down the stairs, and the sadistic thread in this is, on the basis of the pugnacious playing, indicated in the pursuing and overcoming of the child. The libidinous excitement becomes enhanced and urges to sexual action, represented in the dream by the grasping of the child and the conveyance of it to the middle of the stairway. Up to this point, the dream would be one of pure sexual symbolism, and obscure for the unpracticed dream interpreter. But this symbolic gratification, which would have ensured undisturbed sleep, was not sufficient for the powerful libidinous excitement. The excitement leads to an orgasm, and thus the whole stairway symbolism is unmasked as a substitute for coitus. Freud lays stress on the rhythmical character of both actions, as one of the reasons for the sexual utilization of the stairway symbolism, and this dream especially seems to corroborate this, for, according to the express assertion of the dreamer, the rhythm of a sexual act was the most pronounced feature in the whole dream. Still another remark concerning the two pictures, which, aside from their real significance, also have the value of Weibsbilder, literally woman pictures, but idiomatically women. This is at once shown by the fact that the dream deals with a big and a little picture, just as the dream content presents a big grown-up and a little girl. That cheap pictures could also be obtained points to the prostitution complex, just as the dreamer's surname in the little picture and the thought that it was intended for his birthday point to the parent complex, to be born on the stairway, to be conceived in coitus. The indistinct final scene, in which the dreamer sees himself on the staircase landing, lying in bed and feeling wet, seems to go back into childhood, even beyond the infantile onanism, and manifestly has its prototype in similar pleasurable scenes of bedwetting. 6. A modified stair dream. To one of my very nervous patients, who was an abstainer, whose fancy was fixed on his mother, and who repeatedly dreamed of climbing stairs accompanied by his mother, I once remarked that moderate masturbation would be less harmful to him than enforced abstinence. This influence provoked the following dream. His piano teacher reproaches him for neglecting his piano playing, and for not practicing the Étude of Moscheles and Clementi's Gradus ad Parnassum. In relation to this he remarked that the gradus is only a stairway, and that the piano itself is only a stairway, as it has a scale. It is correct to say that there is no series of associations which cannot be adapted to the representation of sexual facts. I conclude with the dream of a chemist, a young man who has been trying to give up his habit of masturbation, by replacing it with intercourse with women. Preliminary statement. On the day before the dream he had given a student instruction concerning Grignard's reaction, in which magnesium is to be dissolved in absolutely pure ether under the catalytic influence of iodine. 2 days before, there had been an explosion in the course of the same reaction, in which the investigator had burned his hand. Dream 1. He is to make phenylmagnesium bromide. He sees the apparatus with particular clearness, but he has substituted himself for the magnesium. He is now in a curious swaying attitude. He keeps repeating to himself, "This is the right thing. It is working. My feet are beginning to dissolve, and my knees are getting soft." Then he reaches down and feels for his feet, and meanwhile, he does not know how, he takes his legs out of the crucible, and then again says to himself, "That cannot be. Yes, it must be so. It has been done correctly." Then he partially awakens and repeats the dream to himself, because he wants to tell it to me. He is distinctly afraid of the analysis of the dream. He is much excited during this semi-sleeping state, and repeats continually, "Phenyl, phenyl." 2. He is in with his whole family at 11:30. He is to be at the Schottenthor for a rendezvous with a certain lady, but he does not wake up until 11:30. He says to himself, "It is too late now. When you get there it will be 12:30. The next instant he sees the whole family gathered about the table, his mother and the servant girl with the soup tureen, with particular clearness. Then he says to himself, "Well, if we are eating already, I certainly can't get away." Analysis. He feels sure that even the first dream contains a reference to the lady whom he is to meet at the rendezvous. The dream was dreamed during the night before the expected meeting. The student to whom he gave the instruction is a particularly unpleasant fellow. He had said to the chemist, "That isn't right," because the magnesium was still unaffected, and the latter answered as though he did not care anything about it, "It certainly isn't right." He himself must be this student. He is as indifferent towards his analysis as the student is towards his synthesis. The he in the dream, however, who accomplishes the operation, is myself. How unpleasant he must seem to me with his indifference towards the success achieved. Moreover, he is the material with which the analysis, synthesis, is made. For it is a question of the success of the treatment. The legs in the dream recall an impression of the previous evening. He met a lady at a dancing lesson whom he wished to conquer. He pressed her to him so closely that she once cried out. After he had stopped pressing against her legs, he felt her firm responding pressure against his lower thighs, as far as just above his knees, at the place mentioned in the dream. In this situation, then, the woman is the magnesium in the retort, which is at last working. He is feminine towards me, as he is masculine towards the woman. If it will work with the woman, the treatment will also work. Feeling and becoming aware of himself in the region of his knees refers to masturbation, and corresponds to his fatigue of the previous day. The rendezvous had actually been set up for 11:30. His wish to oversleep and to remain with his usual sexual objects, that is, with masturbation, corresponds with his resistance. End of section 5.
Dream Psychology by Sigmund Freud, translated by M.D. Eder. Chapter 6. The Wish in Dreams. That the dream should be nothing but a wish fulfillment surely seemed strange to us all, and that not alone because of the contradictions offered by the anxiety dream. After learning from the first analytical explanations that the dream conceals sense and psychic validity, we could hardly expect so simple a determination of this sense. According to the correct but concise definition of Aristotle, the dream is a continuation of thinking in sleep, in so far as one sleeps. Considering that during the day our thoughts produce such a diversity of psychic acts, judgments, conclusions, contradictions, expectations, intentions, etc., why should our sleeping thoughts be forced to confine themselves to the production of wishes? Are there not, on the contrary, many dreams that present a different psychic act in dream form, for example a solicitude, and is not the very transparent father's dream mentioned above of such a nature? From the gleam of light falling into his eyes while asleep, the father draws the solicitous conclusion that a candle has been upset and may have set fire to the corpse. He transforms this conclusion into a dream by investing it with a senseful situation enacted in the present tense. What part is played in this dream by the wish fulfillment, and which are we to suspect? The predominance of the thought continued from the waking state, or of the thought incited by the new sensory impression? All these considerations are just, and force us to enter more deeply into the part played by the wish fulfillment in the dream, and into the significance of the waking thoughts continued in sleep. It is in fact the wish fulfillment that has already induced us to separate dreams into two groups. We have found some dreams that were plainly wish fulfillments, and others in which wish fulfillment could not be recognized, and was frequently concealed by every available means. In this latter class of dreams we recognized the influence of the dream censor. The undisguised wish dreams were chiefly found in children, yet fleeting, open-hearted wish dreams seemed, I purposely emphasize this word, to occur also in adults. We may now ask whence the wish fulfilled in the dream originates. But to what opposition or to what diversity do we refer this whence? I think it is to the opposition between conscious daily life and a psychic activity remaining unconscious, which can only make itself noticeable during the night. I thus find a threefold possibility for the origin of a wish. Firstly, it may have been incited during the day, and owing to external circumstances failed to find gratification. There is thus left for the night an acknowledged but unfulfilled wish. Secondly, it may come to the surface during the day but be rejected, leaving an unfulfilled but suppressed wish. Or thirdly, it may have no relation to daily life and belong to those wishes that originate during the night from the suppression. If we now follow our scheme of the psychic apparatus, we can localize a wish of the first order in the system foreconscious. We may assume that a wish of the second order has been forced back from the foreconscious system into the unconscious system, where alone, if anywhere, it can maintain itself. While a wish feeling of the third order we consider altogether incapable of leaving the unconscious system. This brings up the question whether wishes arising from these different sources possess the same value for the dream, and whether they have the same power to incite a dream. On reviewing the dreams which we have at our disposal for answering this question, we are at once moved to add as a fourth source of the dream wish the actual wish incitements arising during the night, such as thirst and sexual desire. It then becomes evident that the source of the dream wish does not affect its capacity to incite a dream, that a wish suppressed during the day asserts itself in the dream can be shown by a great many examples. I shall mention a very simple example in this class. A somewhat sarcastic young lady, whose younger friend has become engaged to be married, is asked throughout the day by her acquaintances whether she knows and what she thinks of the fiancé. She answers with unqualified praise, thereby silencing her own judgment, as she would prefer to tell the truth, namely that he is an ordinary person. The following night she dreams that the same question is put to her, and that she replies with the formula, "In case of subsequent orders it will suffice to mention the number." Finally, we have learned from numerous analyses that the wish in all dreams that have been subject to distortion has been derived from the unconscious, and has been unable to come to perception in the waking state. Thus it would appear that all wishes are of the same value and force for the dream formation. I am at present unable to prove that the state of affairs is really different, but I am strongly inclined to assume a more stringent determination of the dream wish. Children's dreams leave no doubt that an unfulfilled wish of the day may be the instigator of the dream, but we must not forget that it is, after all, the wish of a child, that it is a wish feeling of infantile strength only. I have a strong doubt whether an unfulfilled wish from the day would suffice to create a dream in an adult. It would rather seem that as we learn to control our impulses by intellectual activity, we more and more reject as vain the formation or retention of such intense wishes as are natural to childhood. In this, indeed, there may be individual variations. Some retain the infantile type of psychic processes longer than others. The differences are here the same as those found in the gradual decline of the originally distinct visual imagination. In general, however, I am of the opinion that unfulfilled wishes of the day are insufficient to produce a dream in adults. I readily admit that the wish instigators originating in conscious life contribute towards the incitement of dreams, but that is probably all. The dream would not originate if the foreconscious wish were not reinforced from another source. That source is the unconscious. I believe that the conscious wish is a dream inciter only if it succeeds in arousing a similar unconscious wish which reinforces it. Following the suggestions obtained through the psychoanalysis of the neuroses, I believe that these unconscious wishes are always active and ready for expression whenever they find an opportunity to unite themselves with an emotion from conscious life, and that they transfer their greater intensity to the lesser intensity of the latter. Footnote: They share this character of indestructibility with all psychic acts that are really unconscious, that is, with psychic acts belonging to the system of the unconscious only. These paths are constantly open and never fall into disuse. They conduct the discharge of the exciting process as often as it becomes endowed with unconscious excitement. To speak metaphorically, they suffer the same form of annihilation as the shades of the lower region in the Odyssey, who awoke to new life the moment they drank blood. The processes depending on the foreconscious system are destructible in a different way. The psychotherapy of the neuroses is based on this difference. End of footnote. It may therefore seem that the conscious wish alone has been realized in a dream, but a slight peculiarity in the formation of this dream will put us on the track of the powerful helper from the unconscious. These ever-active and, as it were, immortal wishes from the unconscious recall the legendary Titans who from time immemorial have borne the ponderous mountains which were once rolled upon them by the victorious gods, and which even now quiver from time to time from the convulsions of their mighty limbs. I say that these wishes found in the repression are of themselves of an infantile origin, as we have learned from the psychological investigation of the neuroses. I should like, therefore, to withdraw the opinion previously expressed that it is unimportant whence the dream wish originates, and replace it by another, as follows. The wish manifested in the dream must be an infantile one. In the adult, it originates in the unconscious, while in the child, where no separation and censor as yet exist between foreconscious and unconscious, or where these are only in the process of formation, it is an unfulfilled and unrepressed wish from the waking state. I am aware that this conception cannot be generally demonstrated, but I maintain nevertheless that it can be frequently demonstrated, even when it is not suspected, and that it cannot be generally refuted. The wish feelings which remain from the conscious waking state are therefore relegated to the background in the dream formation. In the dream content, I shall attribute to them only the part attributed to the material of actual sensations during sleep. If I now take into account those other psychic instigations remaining from the waking state which are not wishes, I shall only adhere to the line mapped out for me by this train of thought. We may succeed in provisionally terminating the sum of energy of our waking thoughts by deciding to go to sleep. He is a good sleeper who can do this. Napoleon I is reputed to have been a model of this sort, but we do not always succeed in accomplishing it, or in accomplishing it perfectly. Unsolved problems, harassing cares, overwhelming impressions continue the thinking activity even during sleep, maintaining psychic processes in the system which we have termed the foreconscious. These mental processes continuing into sleep may be divided into the following groups. 1. That which has not been terminated during the day owing to casual prevention. 2. That which has been left unfinished by temporary paralysis of our mental power, i.e. the unsolved. 3. That which has been rejected and suppressed during the day. This unites with a powerful group, 4, formed by that which has been excited in our unconscious during the day by the work of the foreconscious. Finally, we may add group 5, consisting of the indifferent and hence unsettled impressions of the day. We should not underrate the psychic intensities introduced into sleep by these remnants of waking life, especially those emanating from the group of the unsolved. These excitations surely continue to strive for expression during the night, and we may assume with equal certainty that the sleeping state renders impossible the usual continuation of the excitement in the foreconscious, and the termination of the excitement by its being conscious. As far as we can normally become conscious of our mental processes, even during the night, in so far we are not asleep. I shall not venture to state what change is produced in the foreconscious system by the sleeping state, but there is no doubt that the psychological character of sleep is essentially due to the change of energy in this very system, which also dominates the approach to motility, which is paralyzed during sleep. In contradistinction to this, there seems to be nothing in the psychology of the dream to warrant the assumption that sleep produces any but secondary changes in the conditions of the unconscious system. Hence, for the nocturnal excitation in the foreconscious, there remains no other path than that followed by the wish excitements from the unconscious. This excitation must seek reinforcement from the unconscious, and follow the detours of the unconscious excitations. But what is the relation of the foreconscious day remnants to the dream? There is no doubt that they penetrate abundantly into the dream, that they utilize the dream content to obtrude themselves upon consciousness even during the night. Indeed, they occasionally even dominate the dream content and impel it to continue the work of the day. It is also certain that the day remnants may just as well have any other character as that of wishes, but it is highly instructive and even decisive for the theory of wish fulfillment to see what conditions they must comply with in order to be received into the dream. Let us pick out one of the dreams cited above as examples. For example, the dream in which my friend Otto seems to show the symptoms of Basedow's disease. My friend Otto's appearance occasioned me some concern during the day, and this worry, like everything else referring to this person, affected me. I may also assume that these feelings followed me into sleep. I was probably bent on finding out what was the matter with him. In the night my worry found expression in the dream which I have reported, the content of which was not only senseless, but failed to show any wish fulfillment. But I began to investigate for the source of this incongruous expression of the solicitude felt during the day, and analysis revealed the connection. I identified my friend Otto with a certain Baron L, and myself with a Professor R. There was only one explanation for my being impelled to select just this substitution for the day thought. I must have always been prepared in the unconscious to identify myself with Professor R, as it meant the realization of one of the immortal infantile wishes, viz., that of becoming great. Repulsive ideas respecting my friend, that would certainly have been repudiated in a waking state, took advantage of the opportunity to creep into the dream, but the worry of the day likewise found some form of expression through a substitution in the dream content. The day thought, which was no wish in itself but rather a worry, had in some way to find a connection with the infantile, now unconscious and suppressed wish, which then allowed it, though already properly prepared, to originate for consciousness. The more dominating this worry, the stronger must be the connection to be established. Between the contents of the wish and that of the worry there need be no connection, nor was there one in any of our examples. We can now sharply define the significance of the unconscious wish for the dream. It may be admitted that there is a whole class of dreams in which the incitement originates preponderatingly, or even exclusively, from the remnants of daily life. And I believe that even my cherished desire to become at some future time a Professor Extraordinarius would have allowed me to slumber undisturbed that night, had not my worry about my friend's health been still active. But this worry alone would not have produced a dream. The motive power needed by the dream had to be contributed by a wish, and it was the affair of the worriment to procure for itself such wish as a motive power of the dream. To speak figuratively, it is quite possible that a day thought plays the part of the contractor or entrepreneur in the dream. But it is known that no matter what idea the contractor may have in mind, and how desirous he may be of putting it into operation, he can do nothing without capital. He must depend upon a capitalist to defray the necessary expenses, and this capitalist who supplies the psychic expenditure for the dream is invariably and indisputably a wish from the unconscious, no matter what the nature of the waking thought may be. In other cases, the capitalist himself is the contractor for the dream. This indeed seems to be the more usual case. An unconscious wish is produced by the day's work, which in turn creates the dream. The dream processes, moreover, run parallel with all the other possibilities of the economic relationship used here as an illustration. Thus, the entrepreneur may contribute some capital himself, or several entrepreneurs may seek the aid of the same capitalist, or several capitalists may jointly supply the capital required by the entrepreneur. Thus there are dreams produced by more than one dream wish, and many similar variations which may readily be passed over and are of no further interest to us. What we have left unfinished in this discussion of the dream wish we shall be able to develop later. The tertium comparationis in the comparisons just employed, i.e. the sum placed at our free disposal in proper allotment, admits of still finer application for the illustration of the dream structure. We can recognize in most dreams a center especially supplied with perceptible intensity. This is regularly the direct representation of the wish fulfillment. For if we undo the displacements of the dream work by a process of retrogression, we find that the psychic intensity of the elements of the dream thoughts is replaced by the perceptible intensity of the elements in the dream content. The elements adjoining the wish fulfillment have frequently nothing to do with its sense, but prove to be descendants of painful thoughts which oppose the wish. But, owing to their frequently artificial connection with the central element, they have acquired sufficient intensity to enable them to come to expression. Thus, the force of expression of the wish fulfillment is diffused over a certain sphere of association, within which it raises to expression all elements, including those that are in themselves impotent. In dreams having several strong wishes, we can readily separate from one another the spheres of the individual wish fulfillments. The gaps in the dream likewise can often be explained as boundary zones. Although the foregoing remarks have considerably limited the significance of the day remnants for the dream, it will nevertheless be worth our while to give them some attention, for they must be a necessary ingredient in the formation of the dream, inasmuch as experience reveals the surprising fact that every dream shows in its content a connection with some impression of a recent day, often of the most indifferent kind. So far we have failed to see any necessity for this addition to the dream mixture. This necessity appears only when we follow closely the part played by the unconscious wish, and then seek information in the psychology of the neuroses. We thus learn that the unconscious idea, as such, is altogether incapable of entering into the foreconscious, and that it can exert an influence there only by uniting with a harmless idea already belonging to the foreconscious, to which it transfers its intensity, and under which it allows itself to be concealed. This is the fact of transference, which furnishes an explanation for so many surprising occurrences in the psychic life of neurotics. The idea from the foreconscious, which thus obtains an unmerited abundance of intensity, may be left unchanged by the transference, or it may have forced upon it a modification from the content of the transferring idea. I trust the reader will pardon my fondness for comparisons from daily life, but I feel tempted to say that the relations existing for the repressed idea are similar to the situations existing in Austria for the American dentist, who is forbidden to practice unless he gets permission from a regular physician to use his name on the public signboard, and thus cover the legal requirements. Moreover, just as it is naturally not the busiest physicians who form such alliances with dental practitioners, so in the psychic life only such foreconscious or conscious ideas are chosen to cover a repressed idea as have not themselves attracted much of the attention which is operative in the foreconscious. The unconscious entangles with its connections preferentially either those impressions and ideas of the foreconscious which have been left unnoticed as indifferent, or those that have soon been deprived of this attention through rejection. It is a familiar fact from the association studies confirmed by every experience that ideas which have formed intimate connections in one direction assume an almost negative attitude to whole groups of new connections. I once tried from this principle to develop a theory for hysterical paralysis. If we assume that the same need for the transference of the repressed ideas which we have learnt to know from the analysis of the neuroses makes its influence felt in the dream as well, we can at once explain two riddles of the dream, viz. That every dream analysis shows an interweaving of a recent impression, and that this recent element is frequently of the most indifferent character. We may add what we have already learnt elsewhere, that these recent and indifferent elements come so frequently into the dream content as a substitute for the most deep-lying of the dream thoughts, for the further reason that they have least to fear from the resisting censor. But while this freedom from censorship explains only the preference for trivial elements, the constant presence of recent elements points to the fact that there is a need for transference. Both groups of impressions satisfy the demand of the repression for materials still free from associations, the indifferent ones because they have offered no inducement for extensive associations, and the recent ones because they have had insufficient time to form such associations. We thus see that the day remnants, among which we may now include the indifferent impressions when they participate in the dream formation, not only borrow from the unconscious the motive power at the disposal of the repressed wish, but also offer to the unconscious something indispensable, namely, the attachment necessary to the transference. If we here attempted to penetrate more deeply into the psychic processes, we should first have to throw more light on the play of emotions between the foreconscious and the unconscious, to which indeed we are urged by the study of the psychoneuroses, whereas the dream itself offers no assistance in this respect. Just one further remark about the day remnants. There is no doubt that they are the actual disturbers of sleep, and not the dream, which, on the contrary, strives to guard sleep. But we shall return to this point later. We have so far discussed the dream wish. We have traced it to the sphere of the unconscious and analysed its relations to the day remnants, which in turn may be either wishes, psychic emotions of any other kind, or simply recent impressions. We have thus made room for any claims that may be made for the importance of conscious thought activity in dream formations in all its variations. Relying upon our thought series, it would not be at all impossible for us to explain even those extreme cases in which the dream as a continuer of the day work brings to a happy conclusion an unresolved problem of the waking state. We do not, however, possess an example, the analysis of which might reveal the infantile or repressed wish source furnishing such alliance and successful strengthening of the efforts of the foreconscious activity. But we have not come one step nearer a solution of the riddle. Why can the unconscious furnish the motive power for wish fulfillment only during sleep? The answer to this question must throw light on the psychic nature of wishes, and it will be given with the aid of the diagram of the psychic apparatus. We do not doubt that even this apparatus attained its present perfection through a long course of development. Let us attempt to restore it as it existed in an early phase of its activity. From assumptions, to be confirmed elsewhere, we know that at first the apparatus strove to keep us as free from excitement as possible, and in its first formation, therefore, the scheme took the form of a reflex apparatus, which enabled it promptly to discharge through the motor tracts any sensible stimulus reaching it from without. But this simple function was disturbed by the wants of life, which likewise furnished the impulse for the further development of the apparatus. The wants of life first manifested themselves to it in the form of the great physical needs. The excitement aroused by the inner want seeks an outlet in motility, which may be designated as inner changes, or as an expression of the emotions. The hungry child cries or fidgets helplessly, but its situation remains unchanged, for the excitation proceeding from an inner want requires not a momentary outbreak, but a force working continuously. A change can occur only if in some way a feeling of gratification is experienced, which in the case of the child must be through outside help, in order to remove the inner excitement. An essential constituent of this experience is the appearance of a certain perception, of food in our example, the memory picture of which thereafter remains associated with the memory trace of the excitation of want. Thanks to the established connection, there results at the next appearance of this want a psychic feeling which revives the memory picture of the former perception, and thus recalls the former perception itself, i.e., it actually re-establishes the situation of the first gratification. We call such a feeling a wish. The reappearance of the perception constitutes the wish fulfillment, and the full revival of the perception by the want excitement constitutes the shortest road to the wish fulfillment. We may assume a primitive condition of the psychic apparatus in which this road is really followed, i.e., where the wishing merges into an hallucination. This first psychic activity therefore aims at an identity of perception, i.e., it aims at a repetition of that perception which is connected with the fulfillment of the want. This primitive mental activity must have been modified by bitter practical experience into a more expedient secondary activity. The establishment of the identity perception on the short regressive road within the apparatus does not in another respect carry with it the result which inevitably follows the revival of the same perception from without. The gratification does not take place, and the want continues. In order to equalize the internal with the external sum of energy, the former must be continually maintained, just as actually happens in the hallucinatory psychoses and in the deliriums of hunger, which exhaust their psychic capacity in clinging to the object desired. In order to make more appropriate use of the psychic force, it becomes necessary to inhibit the full regression, so as to prevent it from extending beyond the image of memory, whence it can select other paths leading ultimately to the establishment of the desired identity from the outer world. This inhibition and consequent deviation from the excitation becomes the task of a second system which dominates the voluntary motility, i.e., through whose activity the expenditure of motility is now devoted to previously recalled purposes. But this entire complicated mental activity, which works its way from the memory picture to the establishment of the perception identity from the outer world, merely represents a detour which has been forced upon the wish fulfillment by experience. Footnote: Le Lorrain justly extols the wish fulfillment of the dream, quote, sans fatigue sérieuse, sans être obligé de recourir à cette lutte opiniâtre et longue qui use et corrode les jouissances poursuivies. End of footnote. Thinking is indeed nothing but the equivalent of the hallucinatory wish, and if the dream be called a wish fulfillment, this becomes self-evident, as nothing but a wish can impel our psychic apparatus to activity. The dream, which in fulfilling its wishes follows the short regressive path, thereby preserves for us only an example of the primary form of the psychic apparatus which has been abandoned as inexpedient. What once ruled in the waking state when the psychic life was still young and unfit seems to have been banished into the sleeping state, just as we see again in the nursery the bow and arrow, the discarded primitive weapons of grown-up humanity. The dream is a fragment of the abandoned psychic life of the child. In the psychoses, these modes of operation of the psychic apparatus, which are normally suppressed in the waking state, reassert themselves, and then betray their inability to satisfy our wants in the outer world. The unconscious wish feelings evidently strive to assert themselves during the day also, and the fact of transference and the psychoses teach us that they endeavour to penetrate to consciousness and dominate motility by the road leading through the system of the foreconscious. It is therefore the censor lying between the unconscious and the foreconscious, the assumption of which is forced upon us by the dream, that we have to recognize and honor as the guardian of our psychic health. But is it not carelessness on the part of this guardian to diminish its vigilance during the night and to allow the suppressed emotions of the unconscious to come to expression, thus again making possible the hallucinatory regression? I think not, for when the critical guardian goes to rest, and we have proof that his slumber is not profound, he takes care to close the gate to motility. No matter what feelings from the otherwise inhibited unconscious may roam about on the scene, they need not be interfered with. They remain harmless because they are unable to put in motion the motor apparatus which alone can exert a modifying influence upon the outer world. Sleep guarantees the security of the fortress which is under guard. Conditions are less harmless when a displacement of forces is produced, not through a nocturnal diminution in the operation of the critical censor, but through pathological enfeeblement of the latter, or through pathological reinforcement of the unconscious excitations, and this while the foreconscious is charged with energy and the avenues to motility are open. The guardian is then overpowered, the unconscious excitations subdue the foreconscious. Through it they dominate our speech and actions, or they enforce the hallucinatory regression, thus governing an apparatus not designed for them, by virtue of the attraction exerted by the perceptions on the distribution of our psychic energy. We call this condition a psychosis. We are now in the best position to complete our psychological construction, which has been interrupted by the introduction of the two systems, unconscious and foreconscious. We have still, however, ample reason for giving further consideration to the wish as the sole psychic motive power in the dream. We have explained that the reason why the dream is in every case a wish realization is because it is a product of the unconscious, which knows no other aim in its activity but the fulfillment of wishes, and which has no other forces at its disposal but wish feelings. If we avail ourselves for a moment longer of the right to elaborate from the dream interpretation such far-reaching psychological speculations, we are in duty bound to demonstrate that we are thereby bringing the dream into a relationship which may also comprise other psychic structures. If there exists a system of the unconscious, or something sufficiently analogous to it for the purpose of our discussion, the dream cannot be its sole manifestation. Every dream may be a wish fulfillment, but there must be other forms of abnormal wish fulfillment beside this of dreams. Indeed, the theory of all psychoneurotic systems culminates in the proposition that they too must be taken as wish fulfillments of the unconscious. Our explanation makes the dream only the first member of a group most important for the psychiatrist, an understanding of which means the solution of the purely psychological part of the psychiatric problem. But other members of the group of wish fulfillments, for example, the hysterical symptoms, evince one essential quality which I have so far failed to find in the dream. Thus, from the investigations frequently referred to in this treatise, I know that the formation of an hysterical symptom necessitates the combination of both streams of our psychic life. The symptom is not merely the expression of a realized unconscious wish, but it must be joined by another wish from the foreconscious, which is fulfilled by the same symptom, so that the symptom is at least doubly determined, once by each one of the conflicting systems. Just as in the dream, there is no limit to further over-determination. The determination not derived from the unconscious is, as far as I can see, invariably a stream of thought in reaction against the unconscious wish, for example, a self-punishment. Hence I may say, in general, that an hysterical symptom originates only where two contrasting wish fulfillments, having their source in different psychic systems, are able to combine in one expression. Compare my latest formulation of the origin of the hysterical systems in a treatise published by the Zeitschrift für Sexualwissenschaft by Hirschfeld and others, 1908. Examples on this point would prove of little value, as nothing but a complete unveiling of the complication in question would carry conviction. I therefore content myself with the mere assertion, and will cite an example, not for conviction, but for explication. The hysterical vomiting of a female patient proved, on the one hand, to be the realization of an unconscious fancy from the time of puberty, that she might be continuously pregnant and have a multiple of children, and this was subsequently united with the wish that she might have them from as many men as possible. Against this immoderate wish there arose a powerful defensive impulse, but as the vomiting might spoil the patient's figure and beauty, so that she would not find favour in the eyes of mankind, The symptom was therefore in keeping with her punitive trend of thought, and, being thus admissible from both sides, it was allowed to become a reality. This is the same manner of consenting to a wish fulfillment which the queen of the Parthians chose for the triumvir Crassus. Believing that he had undertaken the campaign out of greed for gold, she caused molten gold to be poured into the throat of the corpse. Now hast thou what thou hast longed for. As yet we know of the dream only that it expresses a wish fulfillment of the unconscious, and apparently the dominating foreconscious permits this only after it has subjected the wish to some distortions. We are really in no position to demonstrate regularly a stream of thought antagonistic to the dream wish, which is realized in the dream as in its counterpart. Only now and then have we found in the dream traces of reaction formulations, as for instance the tenderness towards friend R in the uncle dream. But the contribution from the foreconscious, which is missing here, may be found in another place. While the dominating system has withdrawn on the wish to sleep, the dream may bring to expression with manifold distortions a wish from the unconscious, and realize this wish by producing the necessary changes of energy in the psychic apparatus, and may finally retain it through the entire duration of sleep. Footnote: this idea has been borrowed from The Theory of Sleep by Liébaud, who revived hypnotic investigation in our days. Du sommeil provoqué, etc., Paris, 1889. End of footnote. This persistent wish to sleep on the part of the foreconscious in general facilitates the formation of the dream. Let us refer to the dream of the father, who, by the gleam of light from the death chamber, was brought to the conclusion that the body had been set on fire. We have shown that one of the psychic forces decisive in causing the father to form this conclusion, instead of being awakened by the gleam of light, was the wish to prolong the life of the child seen in the dream by 1 moment. Other wishes proceeding from the repression probably escape us, because we are unable to analyze this dream. But as a second motive power of the dream, we may mention the father's desire to sleep, for, like the life of the child, the sleep of the father is prolonged for a moment by the dream. The underlying motive is, let the dream go on, otherwise I must wake up. As in this dream, so also in all other dreams, the wish to sleep lends its support to the unconscious wish. We reported dreams which were apparently dreams of convenience, but, properly speaking, all dreams may claim this designation. The efficacy of the wish to continue to sleep is the most easily recognized in the waking dreams, which so transform the objective sensory stimulus as to render it compatible with the continuance of sleep. They interweave this stimulus with the dream in order to rob it of any claims it might make as a warning to the outer world. But this wish to continue to sleep must also participate in the formation of all other dreams which may disturb the sleeping state from within only. Now then, sleep on. Why, it's but a dream. This is in many cases the suggestion of the foreconscious to consciousness when the dream goes too far, and this also describes in a general way the attitude of our dominating psychic activity toward dreaming, though the thought remains tacit. I must draw the conclusion that throughout our entire sleeping state we are just as certain that we are dreaming as we are certain that we are sleeping. We are compelled to disregard the objection urged against this conclusion that our consciousness is never directed to a knowledge of the former, and that it is directed to a knowledge of the latter only on special occasions when the censor is unexpectedly surprised. Against this objection we may say that there are persons who are entirely conscious of their sleeping and dreaming, and who are apparently endowed with the conscious faculty of guiding their dream life. Such a dreamer, when dissatisfied with the course taken by the dream, breaks it off without awakening, and begins it anew in order to continue it with a different turn, like the popular author who, on request, gives a happier ending to his play. Or, at another time, if placed by the dream in a sexually exciting situation, he thinks in his sleep, "I do not care to continue this dream and exhaust myself by a pollution. I prefer to defer it in favor of a real situation." End of chapter 6.